people of the YouTube, please let me know if you can hear us. And this is consensus layer call 81. We have issue 475 in the PM repo shared there. The first portion will be dedicated to Kiln, aka the current merge sprint, and then we'll go into any other updates and research discussions that we want to. On my end, I do have Carl, Shalway, and Vitalik, so multiple people might come out of this audio.
GM.
Great. Let's go ahead and get started. Kiln. I want to, I think most of you, probably all of you have seen the Kiln V1. Thank you, Mikhail, for putting that together. There are two issues that we've been discussing over the past couple weeks that were known to come into a Kiln V2. You can think of these as kind of extensions and additive. You might get some warnings if you don't use the exchange transition configuration. But that would probably be just at the beginning before the merge happened, and you'd still be able to merge. And the authentication API written by Martin has been written in a way that authentication is on a new port. So if you're not ready to speak authentication, you can use the old port, although we should move in that direction as soon as possible. So these V2 extensions, which will be added to a quote official V2 very soon, you can, they won't interrupt. They just add a little bit that you need to work on. Those issues are linked in those PRs are linked in the issue. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion on these points? Cool. Yeah, nothing really unknown there. We've been talking about these for a month or more. Okay, next up we're going to talk about some Kiln milestones. Tim has put this together. Tim, you want to take it over?
Yes, if I can find the unmute button. I just shared this on the agenda. I can share my screen as well to make it here. So these are basically pretty similar to the stuff we've had for Kintsugi and Amphora, still building on the same format. High level, just a tracker for execution and consensus error teams. Milestone 0 is implementing Kiln starting the implementation. Milestone 1 is implementing Kiln V1, and then we'll probably change this to Kiln V2 sometime in the next week. Maybe we can add a separate milestone for V2 actually. Yeah, I think it's probably cleaner to just add the second milestone. Then basically, if you can try to interop with other clients on kind of an ad hoc basis, that's M2. M3, like Danny said, we'll be starting some DevNet builds. I guess the one thing we want to make sure that we get right in these DevNet builds, additionally to like everything else, is running optimistic sync on CL clients. That was one of the things people commented on about the Kintsugi milestones, where we were kind of done, but hadn't actually gotten optimistic fully nailed down yet. So we want to make sure we get that. And then similarly to last time, after we've run a couple DevNets that things are working as expected, we'll set up kind of a persistent version of Kiln. I still have Kintsugi here, so I need to fix that as well. But we'll set up a persistent version of Kiln, and then once it's up and it's stable, we'll release it to the public and basically advertise Kiln as the last kind of place to test things before we actually run through the merge on existing test nets if everything goes as expected. And then this last part is just like previously saying, we'll focus the first half of the core devs and consensus zero calls on this stuff.
Sweet, thanks, Tim. Any questions? Yeah, I think it goes without saying, in parallel to the kind of production engineering effort that is highlighted by this, lots and lots of ongoing testing. So like, we'll likely do regular shadow forking to kind of more continuously test the builds. There's a lot of work coming out in Hive and some other simulation frameworks, and maybe some new consensus vectors along the way. Actually, I just kind of mentioned testing. Let's do that right now. Does anybody have any testing updates or anything to share in that domain?
I just merged a PR to Mergebug that adds support for Kiln. So if anybody was interested in using that, that should be available in master. If you have any problems, feel free to message me about it.
Thanks like that.
I shared a message on Discord about kurtosis. It's this tool you can use to spin up local multi-client testnets. If anyone wants to try that out, for example, with your feature branch versus stable from other clients, do let me know. I've shared the documentation and happy to help out with that.
Is kurtosis using Kintsugi builds, or is there going to be much work to swap it over?
So you just specify it as a flag, so you can just change that on the fly.
Great.
And at least the idea is to have that tested locally before you decide to join any devnets. That being said, I probably start working on a devnet tomorrow. Most likely with all the changes, the devnet won't work, but if it does, then I'll let people know about it.
Great. That can lead us into the next component. I know Kiln's been up for a relatively short time, but it's also not the deepest of change. For Perry's sake and for initial interop sake, where do people stand? Are there any Kiln v1 implementations on CL or EL?
Cheku has a Kiln engine API implementation. We don't have authentication yet. We haven't done much testing on it, but we could be able to match that up with an EL that has it and actually check it works well.
Prism has the implementation. We've just passed the vector test. I passed the link of our test result there, and we still need to do the authentication.
Cool.
Lodestar, I'm gonna merge now implementation, and we are running in CI against Geth and Nethermind successfully. No authentication though.
The Lighthouse is still progressing with the spec implementation.
So if you're running against
Nimbus has
yeah, go on.
Nimbus likewise doesn't have authentication. There's a branch which is passing tests thus far, but it's been essentially local tests or local testnet type things.
Yeah, and for Grandina, we are still working on that.
Got it. And on the execution layer, Dapline, you mentioned y'all are building against Geth and Nethermind. So are Geth and Nethermind at least spec compliant? I know there's a lot of productionizing to happen beyond spec compliance.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Pretty much, you're saying that Geth and Nethermind are Kiln compliant?
Yeah, we're running. So this work has been done by Gitjinder, but we are running some commit of some branch.
Got it. Okay, so we're in the realm of being able to do some initial interop.
I think so.
Sounds good.
Well, that's
one thing I
up to them
should
to
have
say.
noted. Sorry. One thing I should have noted is there is a flag for take you to switch from Kintsugi to Kiln mode. We'll support both. So it's in the testing channel. T Benner posted it just recently.
Thanks. Okay. Great. Well, those are the primary items that we had in here. The additional stuff coming in a V2, which are these extensions, Kiln milestones. Thanks for giving the update on y'all's Kiln status and any testing discussions. Are there other merge, Kiln, or other related items for discussion today?
I have a PR open to the Beacon APIs repo. It's number 190. It's to add an execution optimistic flag to responses to indicate when we're returning information about optimistic data. It's pretty tricky to figure out what we want to do in terms of the API. I've written, if you go to that issue, you see I've written the PR. I've written some history about why we've chosen to do that. I think it's getting pretty close to the point where we need to decide on how to standardize this API. So I am tempted to go forward with 190 unless we're going to get some opposition from people. It seems that there's not a whole lot at this stage, but yeah, I just kind of want to call last rounds on that one before we commit to it.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, put your eyes on this thing. I agree. Waiting beyond Monday doesn't make much sense. I think people have given their input.
I mean, I don't know if this is better discussed in the issue or not, but I'll just say last I saw it was just the same one. There was an open question of kind of changing the idea of an optional field or kind of a little bit of chaos that might be caused by changing the presence or absence of a field in the return.
Yeah, there's two conversations. One is the use of this additional bool, and the other is how do you upgrade, if and how do you upgrade the spec versioning or the endpoint versioning. Paul, what's the state of that?
I'm not sure that there's a clear decision on whether we need to bump the tags or not, on the version things or not, but either way, I think we need to go ahead with this change to the API. If anyone feels strongly either way about adding that field, they should jump into that issue and start with that PR and start commenting about it. It seems there's a precedence for adding things to that, or like adding values there without bumping the version. So it's tempting to move ahead with that. Yeah, keen to get some opinions.
Yeah, I'd very much like not to have to bump the version on everything. I think we've shown we can add metadata in the past. Because otherwise we just wind up breaking every client because we've got to change a number in the URL. There's a slightly more complex one where that field wound up, in the body for one of the requests, and we currently, I think the PR bumps that to V2. Personally, I'd prefer to leave that as V1 because it's still just an additional field. I'm not strong on it though, whatever.
Cool. Please take discussions to 190, and yeah, I agree. We should wrap this one up pretty soon. Other merge-related items today?
Yeah, I'd like to raise the question of execution payload deduplication here. So here is the PR. Yeah, for the context, the execution payloads will be in current design. They will be stored on both EL and CL side, and there is an idea to just offload execution payloads from CL and request them from EL side ad hoc. This PR is just one of the approaches to do this. and it's been unattended for a while, and that current like default option is not include this into the scope of the merge and not implement it at the merge, not implement this functionality unless there is the other opinions and somebody thinks that it will be critical to have it at the merge. Also, in addition, note that if we want to introduce this kind of change after the merge, we don't need to do a hard fork for that. So it may be implemented out of the hard fork timeline, which is good. And this problem of duplicated data will start to annoy us sometimes after some period after the merge. So that's two things to consider by making this decision.
Can I add a couple?
Yep, sorry.
The consensus layer is expected not to prune at least to a depth of, I believe, 4 months. So what this looks like in practice is 4 months of duplicated execution payloads or ETH1 blocks. You know, it's essentially the size of what is on that network today. 4 months of it, you get additional storage on a local node. That is, did we run the numbers? I can't remember what the numbers are. It's probably not horrible, but then if you start looking into things like any of like 4488 or any of these items where you're adding to the core blocks size without doing any sort of sophisticated sharding, you know, you get that multiplier on what that 4 months looks like. So it's probably something that's very nice to do. I'm in terms of timing, I would put it not super critical on the merge, but probably pretty important to get in. Mikhail, do you have an estimate on 4 months of execution payloads without
it should be
4488?
It's like 80 gigabytes or some kind of that.
I see.
If we take into account the average size, that is like it's on the average size of blocks that are on the mainnet currently.
Are other clients implementing indexing using the payload hash, whether it's to look up the payload itself or it's to look up the beacon block that contains the payload? Because I saw there's some discussion on Discord, but I wasn't sure whether there's some concrete conclusion that came up with it.
For Lighthouse, we're trying to avoid creating an index for it. If it's pre-finalization, it's kind of lost for us at the moment. If it's after finalization, as in unfinalized, then we can just search a proto array for it, which is not 01, but it's still fast enough generally.
This is a potential point of concern for Nimbus, because Nimbus is switching to depending more on slot numbers than hashes, as Paul was alluding to for pre-finalization specifically.
But I guess my concern is more on the API side. So consensus client will not serve this type of payload lookup, right? So this will be outsourced to the execution layer client.
Well, the idea is that there's network protocols where you would be expected to serve it, but if you had deduplicated it, you'd need to be able to dynamically get it from your execution layer to serve those requests on that 4 month bound at least. And so there's probably two ways. One is to do this hash lookup where I just give the execution layer a bunch of hashes to retrieve them, or you could do a more like by range request. And there was a bit of debate probably 6 or 8 weeks ago on that. And there's the hash lookup is currently what's in that PR. But you could probably make a compelling argument to be doing the by range request as well. But again, that's an implication not really for the execution layer. I guess you need to be able to get those payload hashes for requests, but it's more of an implication on the execution layer, I'd say.
Got it.
Okay. I'm not like super eager to like try to release this in Kiln. I think that this is something we should have discussion with the execution layer on. I know, Mikhail, you had done some initial discussion with Geth, especially on those hash lookups, but it might be worth opening that up once more before we push this PR one way or the other.
Right, and I would say that if like CL client implementers think that it's critical, just comment on this PR, raise this question in chat and Discord, so we can proceed with that. Otherwise, as I've said, the default option is just leave it there as it is now.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many EL client devs, or I guess if all EL client devs will watch this, so it might be worth just having an explicit ping on Discord.
Right, I think this is critical for CL more than for EL, like having this feature. So, and yeah, definitely at first engage EL client implementers into discussion when we will be finding the right way of implementing and designing this functionality.
Yeah, fair. I suppose the question of criticalness is also a software implication for the CL, but it's also just what are the full node requirements? Because if you don't add this, you know, it is plus 60 to 80 or so gigabytes of requirement, which kind of impacts the unification of CL and EL in some sense. Okay, please chime in there. And we will continue the conversation. Anything else on this one before we move on?
From my side.
Okay. Other merge and Kiln related items for today.
I did just want to raise that something we're looking at now is trying to collect the fee recipient from all existing phase 0 validators before the merge. So, you know, kind of putting interactive prompts and warnings and stuff around the VC and trying to keep track of people who haven't provided their fee recipient. I just want to kind of raise it because it's going to be something that faces all clients. It's probably going to require updating to all of the Become a Validator guides. Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a weird thing where we have to collect one piece of information, extra information from all the validators. So just wanted to kind of mention that to bring it to implementers' minds. And also it's something that people who are doing kind of education and documentation are going to have to deal with as well.
This is a great question. Do you know if there's any like documentations around that already? Because I saw TagCrew has implemented this already, so I wonder if we should have some sort of standard alignment across this.
Yeah, I don't know of any documentation about it. I wasn't aware that that TagCrew had already done it. Would be keen to. Yeah, I agree. It'd be nice if we could make it uniform.
So there's two things here. One is, you know, where are you providing this information? You know, is it per validator on the VC? Is there a backup on the BN? Like that kind of stuff. And then the other is, because we're going to need to gather the information, you know, how does the client go about getting that from the user? And both of those need to be answered in a sane way. I believe the answers to the former, or there's beginning to be conformance on. Maybe BN fallback, but the VC by default drives on a per validator basis. Is that the case?
Yeah, we're kind of like the graffiti in a lot of ways. It's a similar deal where it's like the validator client, you know, you can supply one that applies to all of them. You can go and like edit a file where you can manually specify it for each validator. And there's also an option to read it from a flag. So you can from a file, so you can change it programmatically. And if none of that works in the VC, then the BN can have a backup one to deal with it. I'm not sure we necessarily need to standardize all of that, just because it leaves room for innovation. But yeah, the other one about figuring out how and when to collect it, and yeah, is something we could probably standardize on. I think what we might influence for the time being is you can just edit. We have this validator definitions file, so you can just edit this YAML file and add a key for all your validators if you want. And alternatively, the really super easy way is that you can have a prompt when you start. Like when you start your VC, you get a prompt if you don't have a fee recipient for any validator, and you need to fill it in to continue. And we'll have a flag to bypass that for people who are dealing with automated setups. The
Sorry, I was
API
muted.
for the so I was going to say the key store API will need to be updated as well. I briefly talked to Michael about it. He said that it's been raised once before.
Got it. And I was gonna just say I was muted and talking to myself for a second. The Trent, we should add that to kind of our outreach list. I think in general we should do a round to make sure that we get in touch with all the ecosystem participants that maintain guides. And there's probably a handful of things we want to nudge them on, and this is one of them.
Sounds good.
Anything else on that? Okay, other items for today on the merge.
Oh, sorry, one quick shout out. There is a merge community call tomorrow, basically the same time as this call. So we're going to get application developers, infrastructure providers, and whatnot to come and ask their questions. It's always helpful if a handful of client devs show up when there's more technical questions, or if you just want to show your clients to people in the ecosystem. So there's a issue on the PM repo, but it basically starts at the same time as this call tomorrow.
Cool. Y'all should get a couple of clients to raise their hand saying that they'll deploy their client end to end on Kiln, full interfaces and everything.
You mean applications, right?
Yeah, sorry, application developers.
Yes, that's the goal. And if people here have ideas of applications that are tracing heavy, I think that's one thing that we haven't been able to I don't have like a great candidate off the top of my mind. So if people have ideas of something that's like tracing heavy that we could deploy on Kiln to make sure all of that works as expected, that would be really valuable.
Who are the big tracers? I know exchanges always say so. I would assume maybe the...
yeah, block explorers. I've asked some. A lot of them are pretty busy right now, so they haven't said they won't do it, but they haven't committed. But yeah, exchanges and block explorers are the two that I had off the top of my head.
Got it. Thanks, Tim. Other merge items. Cool. Thank you to some of our execution layer devs that joined. Sweet. Moving on, are there any other client-related updates that people would like to share today? Okay. Excellent. Easy. Research spec R&D items. I know there's a lot of stuff floating around on some dank sharding, data availability sampling, and various things. Any updates or comments here? Sweet. I guess I'll say in preparation for what is on the execution layer called Shanghai, we should be honing in on a feature set for that associated fork. Execution layer EIP for withdrawals is in progress to complement the work in progress PRs on the consensus layer, to put them together for withdrawals for exited validators and partial withdrawals for proposers. Assuming that goes to Shanghai, we'll get those specs ironed out on the consensus layer. I think the other additional item we've been talking about is Yasik's cleanup of historic roots. And I'm not sure if there's anything else other than maybe kind of these fork choice updates, like that being a very concrete place in which if they had not been upgraded, they become upgraded. Are there other things that I'm missing for the discussion for that future fork?
The one thing, I think this is unlikely, but so Vitalik had these two proposals for blob data transactions. I think
Right.
the more complex one might have some work on the beacon chain.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like, anyways, I think it's more likely we do the simpler one, but if we were to do the more complex.
So the discussion on this side has been increasingly going in the direction of the more complex one. The argument is that even though the total implementation complexity of the complex one is higher, the simple one puts all of the effort on the execution clients, and the more complex one puts a bit less effort on execution clients and more on beacon clients, and execution clients are already expected to be very overworked for Shanghai.
Oh, I like that actually. Let's do the complex one.
Yeah, I mean, and that more complex one does get to something that looks much more like a final sharding proposal. And the complexity on the consensus side ends up being primarily the updating of data structures and the management of data. Not a lot of what I call consensus complexity.
Right, it's like the consensus complexity is like not very high on the consensus side, not very high on the execution side. By far the highest complexity of that EIP is on the block creation side, actually, because of how it introduces these transactions, where the transaction has a piece that goes on one side and a piece that goes on the other side. But like in some ways, that's if we're willing to make some sacrifices, that kind of complexity is fairly manageable. Like basically we only really need one implementation that can make these blocks, right? And if we have one good one, then it would as long as everyone can do the verification, it would still be fine.
So just a heads up, ETH Denver comes up next week, and there's a crew that is attempting to prototype a version of this end to end. So hopefully have some more insight through that exploration. But yeah, that's definitely the other item that's being explored and potentially in what might be called Shanghai or a subsequent upgrade. We had discussed in another channel to do a dank sharding educational workshop for the consensus layer, and I guess anyone that wants to join. And we tentatively discussed early this coming week. I'm going to circle back with Dankrad, who's on this call actually, and some others to see if we want to target a date for this coming week. I think it'd be valuable to get in before the ETH Denver sprint. But we'll let you know very soon. Cool. Other things? Other items? Things to discuss? Okay. The silence implies we were reaching the end of the meeting. Are there any other items to discuss? Any announcements? Anything today? I will say the Dev Connect dates are public. That's the 18th to 25th. There's going to be lots of fun stuff going on. That initial calendar is out. We do plan on doing some L1 R&D workshop stuff right at the beginning. So if you're going to make some portion of the week and not the entire one, I'd say show up right at the beginning. More details for that soon. Cool. Let's close it out. Thank you. Easy meeting, and see y'all on all these fun Kiln milestones. Talk soon. Bye, guys.
Talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks
all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, bye.
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 Bye.